Okay, welcome to the Manchester SEO podcast.
Thank you.
We have on today someone that I've worked with, or I should probably temper that a little bit. You were a couple of levels above, but you were the fourth interview that I had for Calibrate, and it's a pleasure to have you on. I think when it comes down to growing software businesses, global software businesses, and the fuel pricing industry and leadership, there's not many that know more. So thanks for taking the time out and coming on.
It's very generous, James. Thank you.
Tell us about yourself.
Wow, it's a fairly long story, so I'll try and keep it amusing and brief. But so I started life as an engineer. I trained as a chemical engineer, went to the University of Leeds, got into a graduate management training program with Courtaulds at the time, which was a very big UK conglomerate. Found that a little dull, if I'm honest, and opened the paper one day and saw an advert for a US software company looking for technical people in the Northwest, and thought, software, that sounds interesting, I'll have a go at that. Was successful through the interview and started my life in technology in the late 80s, early 90s, which was a good time to be in tech because things were really beginning to take off then. Working for a company that had global clients, were looking for technical people in principle, so I started my career as a help desk jockey.
Right.
Doing tech support and training, began to get sent around the world with that business and just thoroughly enjoyed it. Someone in their early 20s, being given the opportunity to travel to pretty much all four continents on someone else's money was extremely enjoyable, and I learned a lot just as a part of that. How to deal with different cultures, how to develop and nurture relationships with people. Got to see some of the great wonders of the world in the process, so there was a great leisure aspect to it as well. But that for me really got me into tech, and that was a fairly sophisticated product. It was downstream oil and gas. It was essentially to help companies evaluate how they might expand their business in refineries and chemical plants without actually having to build anything. They could do it all through simulation on a computer. So 8 years into that, I got a phone call one day from a local headhunter saying there's this tiny little spin-off from UMIST, University of Manchester, who are interested in someone coming in and helping them set up their commercial activities. So I thought, that sounds interesting. So I went to the interview, and what I learned at the interview is that this was arguably one of the earliest developers of machine learning and very early days of artificial intelligence. And oh boy, had I wished we'd known it was that and called it that at the time, because there's a strong argument we could have been even more successful in growing that business. And I thought, I'll give this a couple of years. It's a very young company, great concept, first client, minimum viable product. So, they had something to go to market with. And I ended up staying there 23 years, believe it or not. And that was the company where you and I eventually met after it had changed names a couple of times. But I had predominantly leadership roles, mainly on the commercial side. So I started sales, I started marketing, I created a professional services team to help implement the software. We created a client success function which helped really develop more and more business from the existing clients we had. I took the company to the stock market in 2000 in the crazy days. So there we were, a company doing $1 million a year in turnover, looking to raise about 7 or 8 to enter the US market, which was by far and away the biggest market for us at the time. And in the middle of the tech boom, we ended up raising over £60 million.
Wow.
And I remember sitting in the boardroom at the end of the day, all the directors looking at each other saying, what on earth are we going to do with 60 million? We only needed 8. And I remember the CTO, one of the co-founders, sticking his hand up saying, well, I need a new laptop. I said, well, I think we can probably afford that. but that really gave us the resources and the opportunity to grow the business on a truly global scale.
Yeah.
And again, it's a long story, but that led us to opening offices in the US, in Brazil, in Tokyo, Japan, in China, in India, and really gave the platform for us to scale and grow that business. And that's where I cut my teeth on understanding, how on earth do you take a great concept and and a relatively small but significant client base, and enter new markets and really grow this at scale. And that to me was an incredible learning opportunity, and I carried those skills forward to the very day today. But it went through its ups and downs, as all tech companies do. It wasn't really right to be public at the time we were in the 2000s. The bubble burst, and then we ended up taking the company private because not many people may know unless they've done it, but being a public company on the public markets is an expensive and time-consuming exercise, particularly for a small business. So it was taken private. Then we went through an acquisition, bought our prime competitor, which ended up with me spending 18 months in Oklahoma, which was nowhere near as much of a challenge as it sounds, particularly as a keen cyclist, because I found out Tulsa, Oklahoma has 160 miles of curated bike trails.
Wow.
So there's plenty for me to do there.
Yeah.
And then after that acquisition, we took the company public again. So I have the dubious reputation of having floated the same company twice, albeit under different names. And that really led up to the company then being taken over by private equity, who found it too interesting to avoid. And at that stage, usual thing with private equity, bit of a clear out at the senior level. I pitched my hat in the ring to become the CEO of that business, and they were very gracious in telling me the only reason I couldn't have that role is because I hadn't bought and sold companies on behalf of private equity before.
Okay.
So I then decided after 23 years, and a fantastic 23 years at that it was probably time to try something else. So I left Calibrate 4 years ago, just before the pandemic, which may or may not have been the right move, but we weren't to know from a pandemic standpoint. And I joined a Canadian company, which is probably one of the biggest software companies, technology companies you've never heard of, called Constellation, who buy and hold tech businesses. So they buy fundamentally sound tech businesses that have the opportunity but not the resources to grow, and they invest in them, help them grow, generate cash, and then they take that cash and they buy the next company, and they do the same with that, and have become extremely successful at it.
Wow.
So for a couple of years I ran 2 healthcare businesses. So one of the other reasons for leaving Calibrate was I wanted to get into an industry that was a bit more ethically aligned. So I ran a business doing genetic laboratory information systems based here in Chester. 17 people, a couple of million a year in turnover. Grew that by 30%, got the profits up into the mid-20s, really enjoyed that, and then was quickly moved to a bigger healthcare business in the portfolio, doing maternity software, believe it or not.
Slightly different.
Which was an interesting, eye-opening experience. But similar thing there, I managed to put the foundations in place to really help that business grow. 2.5 years into that, I just woke up one morning thinking, I'm in my late 50s now. I've always wanted to run my own business, work for myself, not work for someone else. Is it time for me to leave corporate life? And I was afforded the opportunity with the company I was with at the time to do that. And I have to say it's one of the better decisions I've made in probably the last decade. So I've now formed my own business, which I know we talk a little more about. But that for me was a great new chapter in my life, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
What amazed me about your experience was, so when I moved to Calibrate, I was stunned by the size of the deals from a sales point of view, and that's quite rare. I think when talking multiple £1 million deals for software.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the scale of that was immense. I mean, did you ever, when you were building up the the client base for them, were you ever thinking these are big deals? You know, this isn't normal. This isn't, you know, 10 grand here or 10 grand there, which would, some people, that's considered quite big deals.
Mm-hmm.
This is multiple £1 million, you know. But did you have any appreciation of that at the time? Was it just, this is another day, this is what I do, this is...
in some respects, yes, it became not. Sales is never formulaic because every situation is unique in its own right, and you have to adapt how you deal with that appropriately. But there does come a point where you get more comfortable with the size and nature and scale of the kind of deals of that magnitude. And the thing for me, and I would always say this to anyone in sales, is don't get hung up on what it costs someone to invest in your software. Focus on the value that you bring to them. Because that's how Calibrate at the time was able to sell multi-million-dollar deals to the likes of, you know, all the big oil companies, the big supermarkets, the hypermarkets. You remember all the names. And it never ceases to astonish you that you can sit in a room with, you know, the senior management of companies doing billions of dollars a year in turnover, and there you are in your sort of 20-30 million a year thinking, you know, how do I command even the time, never mind the respect and interest of companies of this scale? And it's because of the value that we brought to them. You know, that particular software that Calibrate had, as you'll recall, would deliver returns on investment measured in weeks. So you might be spending $1 million on it, but goodness, the value that it would create.
And the benefits that it's brought to me in my current role is not only dealing with people. I remember your first conversation, you know, James, we're a people first organisation, and working client services, it was a good sign. Very people focused kind of activities all the time, but it was the like you say, it's the benefits. The cost is, you know, are you bringing the benefit to them? Are they going to see a return? How long is it going to take? Can we? What are they struggling with? How can we help them? Is there a solution for what they want? And it's that consultation style of sales that was really, I really enjoyed anyway.
And I think you've made a really great observation in the comments that you made, James, because I think there's a strongly growing trend nowadays that people want to deal more with people now. You know, the humanistic aspect of how we do business, whatever business you're in, has been eroded quite rightly in terms of how industries have moved on in terms of automation, and you know, everyone talks about artificial intelligence nowadays, and I'm already sensing that some people are already sort of pushing back on saying, I don't want to deal with a chatbot or an automated response. You know, I want to talk to someone about this. I want to feel like I have a relationship with the person that's providing that service or that product, and I want to connect emotionally with them. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a return to core humanistic values. I mean, it's a cliche to say, you know, people buy from people. You know, that cliche's been around as long as the hills, right? But you know, it's been around for as long as the hills because it's true. I mean, maybe not highly transactional things, you know, online retail and buying stuff off Amazon, but things that are important to you, or which are valuable, or which are higher cost. You know, buying a car, for example. I can't imagine buying a car without interacting with a human being at some point in the journey.
Well, it's fascinating. It's because we through the 15 odd episodes we've done, we've had copywriters on, sales professionals, we've had social media managers, and their biggest challenge is adapting to AI and what that brings. But the narrative through is that there's a real thirst for humanity in the world in general, And if you're creating a copy for a web page, what is it that makes you stick with it and buy from something? And invariably it's the humanity. It might even be a bit of humour or even a spelling mistake that makes it feel more human. And so that idea of what do people buy, what engages people, what makes them feel something that would make them give you a call or send you an email or come and visit you.
So I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, I use Claude and ChatGPT every day now. So whether I'm writing blog posts or LinkedIn or something around social media, or I'm trying to structure a description of a service that I have, I'll often write something myself and then ask Claude or ChatGPT to sharpen it up. But what I will always do is reimpose my style and my language before I post it, because you may have seen it. There was an interesting post on LinkedIn this week where someone said, here are 2 articles, one written by me and one written by me and then fed through ChatGPT. Can you guess which one is which? And they stand out so clearly as being, well, that was obviously written by him without any adulteration. And that's clearly been written by an AI engine. So you can already tell now where the content has come from.
From an SEO point of view, search engines can pick it up quite quickly as well. And so it's been tests have proven really that it's a negative from that point of view, just because they're trying to understand what a real business is and how they work and understand things. And if you're trying to manufacture something that doesn't exist in reality, then they're working that out. That's essentially what it is. I'm sure we could talk about this for ages. But you've started a business called Elevate Exec.
Correct.
Founder and CEO. How did that come about? Tell us about it. What did you do?
So it was a conversation I had with a good friend of mine who also used to work at Calibrate, funnily enough, who had left a very, very successful sales career to pursue a portfolio role, which is a very simple way of saying that he decided he didn't want to work for one company on their terms anymore. He wanted to work for himself with multiple companies on his terms. And whether that's 3-4 days a week, 10 months a year, or the nature of who he works with and what he does with them. And he was really enjoying that part of his life. So he's good. So he was able to earn arguably a little more than he was doing a lot less work and doing it on his terms. And that really stuck with me. And I thought, do you know what? I end up working 6 days a week. Was fortunate to travel around the world as were you in parts of your career, and I just felt it was time to slow down and find more harmony between work and leisure. So I thought, do you know what, I'm going to do this. I said earlier, I'm in my late 50s. If I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. And I was afforded the opportunity to do it with my previous corporate employer, who I'd also learned a tremendous amount from around operational best practices. And I thought, I'm going to start my own business and I want to give something back. I want to share the experience and knowledge and learning that I'd gained over 35 years doing this for someone else to help early stage businesses prepare themselves for scale and growth. And that was the seed of the idea that ended up being Elevate Exec.
Right. And so, how does it work? Is there a group of you
There's a group of one at the moment. So there really are 2 services that I offer as Elevate Exec. So I spent a good period of my latter career as a chief operating officer. And one of the things I've identified is that early stage businesses need someone that's capable of pulling all the strings and making the day-to-day operations work well, work efficiently, to put the foundations in to allow companies to grow, but to do it in a way where they make the most of the limited resource that they've got. And that's typically a chief operating officer. But in early stage companies, that's an expensive resource. You're talking well into good 6 figures to be able to hire someone like that full time. So I figured, well, what if people could hire that resource on a part-time basis? A couple of days a week, 3-4 days a month, and they could use their experience and help guide the activities that need to take place to allow companies to operate more effectively and more importantly, put the foundations in to enable them to scale efficiently. So one of the services I offer is me as a so-called fractional or part-time chief operating officer. And I've got a good number of conversations going on around that because people recognize the value. And dare I say, founders, owners, CEOs, they're the ones that have the dream and the vision of what they want their business to become. Dare I say, they're not always the best people to manage the day-to-day aspects of it, either because they simply might not have the experience, or they're then juggling too many balls to be able to give enough value to any one of them.
You find when you the idea of scaling a business is something that business owners are always thinking about. How can I scale this? How can I make it bigger? But often you don't have the experience or the knowledge to be able to do that in a way where it can scale with the processes that are already there, rather than it growing into a beast you can't control and all that. And so bringing someone in who has that experience and can do that while you're working on your business could be really valuable, I'm sure.
And I think one of the more unique aspects that I can bring is I've been in the head of sales seat. I've been a chief revenue officer, chief commercial officer. So I understand what it takes to boost revenue and client growth and pipelines and how to bring the business in. But having also been a chief operating officer, I also understand that it's great that you bring all this wonderful business in, but if you can't service that efficiently, you might actually drive the profitability of the business down. So perversely, you're growing top line, but if you've then got to find ways to service that, which ends up in you either having to recruit or not use the resources you've already got in the best way, you can then overspend trying to service that business if you're not careful. So one of the things that I will absolutely be looking to do is to help people understand and craft plans that say, if we end up growing the top line revenue by 12-15%, do we have the capacity and the processes and the resources to service that? And let's get those two things operating in tandem.
Something I've had a trouble with because you can grow the sales, but then you're talking about, well, how can I service that? Do it, and if I'm bringing someone in, it's going to cost this much, which is less than what it is bringing in at the moment, and it makes no sense at all to even bring that business in place.
Now, one of the great things nowadays is there are solutions to this. So part of the reason I'm so keen on the fractional chief operating officer is that if you read Harvard Business Review, they're saying that by 2030, well over half the workforce in the world will be on a portfolio basis. They won't be working for a single company anymore. What that does is it opens up a talent market of people that are available on varying degrees of time commitment that allow you to be much more dynamic about how you run an operations business. You no longer need a bench of 15 project managers waiting for the next project to come in. You can literally within weeks, particularly if your onboarding processes are well sorted, you can bring talent in and out almost on an on-demand basis. So this is something that we're referring to at Elevate Exec as intelligence on demand. And yes, there are lots of platforms out there. It's typically called freelance work, and that's been around for decades. That's not necessarily new, but the ability to bring that talent in at short notice, really capitalize on it, make sure the culture fit is good, and that it doesn't disrupt the existing employees in the business. That's where the changes are taking place now to allow that to happen.
It's interesting. It's half the trouble in the digital marketing world is trust in the people that you're paying to do the work and how they're doing it. Do they know what they're doing?
Mm-hmm.
And especially in organic SEO, it's a very it's moving all the time. The technology's changing, algorithms are changing. Things that worked last week aren't working this week, and all that. So yeah, it's good to have someone who knows what they're doing in terms of bringing in those kind of those people and processes and I suppose systems as well.
Yeah. And then the other aspect of what Elevate Exec is doing is the very services and advice that allows those companies to grow, to scale and grow. So I've developed a diagnostic process, which we call it our Ignite diagnostic, which is a data-driven way for me to sit down with the leadership of almost any business and benchmark them in every major function. So, how effective is your sales team? How good is the marketing process? How does your project delivery or implementation processes stack up? So, over particularly the last 5 to 10 years, I've gained a deep understanding of what are the right metrics to apply, and how can we benchmark a business against their peers in the industry, and use that as a way to identify and uncover what are the top 3 or 4 priorities that you're going to need to focus on to be able to grow this business effectively. And then I have a suite of services which are operational best practices which are absolutely aimed at addressing whatever those priorities are.
Okay.
So I've called that the Symphony Suite because they all work together.
Yeah.
And the chief operating officer, full-time or fractional, is the conductor, essentially, saying, okay, there are 3 things we need to fix. I need service A, F, and G. And those are the things that are going to really help this business transform itself and to be able to scale and grow.
So do you want to go into a bit more detail? Do you say there was 5 aspects that you go in, that you benchmark on? What are those 5?
So they're the typical processes that any good business is going to have working well. Sales, marketing, project delivery or implementation, support, including the client success function.
Yeah.
So it's great that you acquire a client, but how do you then service them to make sure you retain them? And hopefully they invest in more things with you. So one of the things a lot of young, fast-growing companies overlook is the ability to leverage the clients they already have. In simplest terms, getting referrals to enable them to go find other new clients on the basis of the experience their existing clients have had. Or the fact that there may well be adjacent services or cross-sell or upsell opportunities with that same client, particularly if you have multiple products or multiple services. And then last but not least is good old R&D. What is it that you're selling and delivering to clients, and how fast does that need to move on given the sector you're in and competition, and what are the opportunities to expand that?
One of the questions I ask people is how do you measure success when you're in a business, when it comes to that kind of measuring success with a client? What kind of, I'm asking a question you've already answered the question to, really, in terms of how do you measure success with a client? What's the key things that you discuss, probably away from data and metrics,
I think it's a really interesting question, and whenever I meet a company for the first time, but particularly the founders, those that have laid out the vision or the dream of what that company is trying to do, I will often ask them, what's your purpose, mission and meaning? And I'm not asking them to sort of repeat the mission statement that I can probably find on the website. I'm saying, what was it that led you to incubate and bring this dream, this vision to reality? What is it you're trying to do? And then I would ask, well, how would you measure the success of that? Because when people say, how do you measure success, it's too easy to trot out financial indicating, revenue, profit, recurring revenue, client growth, attrition. And they are metrics that you can look at in order to understand some of the detail behind what the company's trying to do. But at the end of the day, a founder will measure success on the basis of how well am I achieving the vision that I laid out for this company. And that might be quantifiable or not. If I want to help the planet last longer and become more resilient to us humans living on it, how do you measure that?
Yes. Do you have any advice for business owners that might be thinking about this and wondering whether to get someone like yourself? I mean, I suppose that's not the question I'm wanting to ask. One, I'm looking at, would you have any advice for someone, a business owner that's looking to grow the business?
Be as clear as humanly possible about what it is you're trying to achieve. Talk to as many existing customers, or if you're really new and you're really just bringing that vision to market, try to talk to as many potential customers as you can to understand the real impact in their terms, in their language, that may likely have. So use your networks. People underestimate the value of their existing networks, and they tend to underestimate the importance of growing that network. So be very clear about what it is you're trying to do. Road test that by talking to as many people as you can in as short a time as possible to really understand the impact that you're going to have, because that will help you shape what the first minimum viable product or service will look like. Make sure that you can couch that in terms that your target audience is going to understand. It's very easy, and this was one of my learnings at Calibrate, particularly if you have a technical background like I do. It's very easy to write benefit statements that are very techy or in the language that you will understand. But one of the things that I developed very early in my career was an ability to interpret what my product people would say about the benefits in language that customers would understand and appreciate and be able to connect. So I think that in the first instance, clear purpose, why are you doing this? Talk to as many people as you can to understand the real impact of that. Understand it in their language, not yours. And use that as the basis of how you begin to communicate that. And communicate deliberately, often, to the point where you might even get bored doing it. But you cannot over communicate that, particularly to your own people. And particularly in a startup or an early stage where everyone's still trying to grapple with what is it we're doing, how are we doing it, how do we deliver that to a client, how do we support it, how do we think they're going to use it, because those things will change rapidly in the first months and sometimes years of a business.
We have a constant conversation with clients, and especially at the start of the relationship with them, it's about how they communicate what they do, but in a way, what would people search for to find you? Because you're essentially trying to put them in front of their, what I always call community, and people, and how do you get them there? Well, we have to understand what the people that are looking to use your service, how would they find you? What would they search for? What's that about? And you find, especially with the technology companies, they talk between themselves and between other businesses that know what they're talking about, like you say, in more of a technical level. But it makes no sense on a website. And we had a scenario where we sent over, we rewrote their service pages and some of their blogs, and the guy came back saying, yes, this is really good. And this is after a few months of them saying it's not really our message, it's not how we see, it's not our tone, it's not this. So we had a chat on the board the other day how we're not really sure we communicate what we do to people that don't know what we do, and the penny drops then, So it goes back to how would the people that would buy from you find you, and how would they understand what you do and how it would benefit them? And it's really simple, but it's lost a lot in translation.
Well, this is one of the premises that I actually have on my website, which is, if a problem is remotely complex, or a challenge appears somewhat complicated, people will look for complicated solutions to it. And one of the things that you learn as an engineer, particularly as a chemical engineer, is you start at the most basic level of understanding by looking at things as simply as possible. Because you can spend an inordinate amount of time trying to find the complicated solution to a problem, and then suddenly find actually it was dead simple. And I wish I'd just stepped back and taken the time to observe at a simple level before I ratchet up and look for the complicated things. And that's one of the things that I've said about business, for some time now, is that there's a tendency for people to believe that the solution has to be complicated. Because the challenge or the opportunity is complex. No, it's often not the case. And I heard your example about how, where and how do we get people to know about our service. I read a lovely anecdote about a locksmith in the US that was starting up his business, and he was trying to figure out how do I advertise where people can find me if they need a locksmith. And at the end of the day, he had some simple stickers made up, and he would go round to park gates and public places, and as close as he could get to near where the lock was, he would leave one of these stickers. Because he figured the time you need a locksmith is when you get to the lock and I've lost my keys.
It's a very good point.
Hang on. But simple, right? I mean, that's a great example. Is it? He didn't get a marketing consultancy to try and help him figure out, how do I get this out in front of my target audience and increase the awareness. He just went round with stickers and said, if you get to a lock and you haven't got the key, or you've got the wrong key, guess what? There's a phone number.
I mean, it's a very it's a really good description of a lot of conversations that we have with businesses on a daily basis.
And the other thing I've found, James, as well, is, and I've said this in the last 3 businesses I've been involved in, some people have a tendency to look toward leaders to always have the answers to things. That's absolutely not the case. My experience has been that more often than not, the answers to things or the solutions to things often sit in and amongst the people that are already in that business. They either just don't know it yet, or they haven't been given the opportunity to really explore and experiment with those things. Either because they've relied on someone else, a manager or a leader, to be the one that comes up with the answer, or they just haven't had the opportunity or the courage to bring it forward. So one of the things I will often do is create an environment where anyone can throw any idea in the ring and experiment with it, and whether it works or not, provided we learn from it.
That kind of brings out, I had in my mind that it'd be good to talk to you about leadership, actually, because I know it's something that you talk about quite a lot. In fact, I looked on your LinkedIn this morning and there's a post about leadership.
Funnily enough, yes.
And then the importance of clear communication, and all that. What do you think are the main key aspects that make a good leader within business?
In no particular order, be very clear about what you're trying to achieve, and make sure you communicate that in as clear a terms as possible to any and all of people that are likely to be involved in that at whatever level, and do it in such a way that they can understand what's expected of them to get to the end result, to get to the outcome that you're looking for. So super clear about what the objective is and how we might get there. Make sure you've amassed the right talent around you deliver on that. So do you have the right skills and experience? Do they have the right assets that they need in order to be able to do their job? So be clear about the goal and equip people to be able to do it. And provided that you've hired the right people and the right managers, get out of their way. I think one of the, and that was part of the purpose of my post this morning, is if you've got the right people, if they understand the goal and they're equipped and capable of delivering on that, and they're given the time and space to do that, the best thing you can do is get out of their way and let them work and collaborate to deliver on that goal. Have the right metrics so that people can measure progress, and then come in back, once the outcome is delivered, to conduct a post-mortem to say, okay, did we do that the right way? Could it have been done better? What did we learn from it? And what will we carry to the next objective or challenge or opportunity?
Yeah.
So, I've had the misfortune of working with some managers that micromanaged, and it drags all the motivation out of you. It takes away any opportunity for you to get job satisfaction doing what you're doing. It often stifles innovation and creativity, because when someone dictates what the goal is and how it should be done, the chances are that they're looking at conventional ways of doing that.
Right.
So, who's going to want to throw an idea in the ring about doing something differently in those circumstances?
Micromanagement is huge in marketing, from what I've found out in the last 4 or 5 years, and especially within agencies, where there's a huge amount of control from directors, and there is a creative industry and a creative function, which marketing is. It does stifle that. But invariably, when the senior manager is, when the people working for the senior manager go on holiday and the senior manager has to actually do the work, they haven't got a clue what they're doing.
Right.
How to do it or anything like that. And I've heard that story so often. It's huge, and like you say, I've worked for a manager who was very micromanaging, and I didn't like it. I don't know anyone that does like it. So if you're a manager, why would you do it?
I think one of the great ways to overcome that, which is again a sign of a good leader, is celebrate success no matter how small. Because one of the best things you can do as a leader to continue to encourage and motivate the team to achieve that outcome is to make sure people get recognised and rewarded along the way. It's not about, I'm not going to do anything until we reach the outcome, and if we don't, it's going to be negative. Make sure that you celebrate and make clear and recognise people's contribution, either team or individually, because that will motivate them to continue to want to be innovative and to drive forward to deliver on that outcome.
You've spoken a lot about people, and we've travelled the world, you more than me, and we've spoken about this before we started recording, about how kind people are around the world, and I was wondering if you had any stories of that from your travels, in terms of whether someone's been kind or helpful, or come well above what you would expect to make you feel comfortable in a new country.
As you might imagine, lots. I'm going to pick out a couple of perhaps some of the extremes. So when I first went to Spain, very early in my career, I was doing a training course with one of the big Spanish oil companies, and we arrived there in the afternoon just to make sure that all the logistics and the setup for the training room were fine. So I had an opportunity to meet the people that I was going to be training. And they were very welcoming in the company offices, and which you would expect, of course, as a visitor. But within about 15 minutes of being there, they said, "Is this your first time in Madrid?" And I said, "Well, yes." said, okay, you're coming out for dinner with us tonight. It was almost a statement, not even a question. I thought, oh, great, to be able to experience Madrid with someone that knows it on your first visit. I thought, who would turn that down? So I said, great, perfect. Well, we're starting at 9:30 in the morning. When will you pick me up? I said, we'll be at your hotel at 9 tonight. I went, ooh. I did hear that there's siestas and people typically eat late because of the climate and one thing or another. And long story short, it was well after midnight before I returned back to the hotel. Yeah. But they didn't need to do that. I thought it was a wonderful gesture. It wasn't just one person either. There were 3 of them. Yeah. So they must have had in mind that there was a possibility they might want to take me out, and if I was agreeable. So they'd obviously made arrangements with family and partners and one thing or another. And I just thought, what a lovely touch. And it really set me up for the training the next day, because we'd broken the ice from a relationship standpoint. We'd had some fantastic food. They'd shown me a little bit of the sights of, around the very centre of Madrid. Yeah. We probably had a couple of Spanish beers or 2 as well while we were there. But I just thought, what a lovely gesture. The second one, which it's a bit more extreme, is, again, I think it was perhaps 2nd or 3rd time in South Africa, again doing training. Yeah. And for whatever reason, I'd woken up that morning on the first day of the training course, not feeling terribly well. Right. So, Gaviscon, usual thing. You take what you can to think, okay, this might take care of things. Yeah. But as the morning progressed on, I felt more and more unwell. Right. To the point where I suddenly felt that I was going to be sick. Right. So I made my excuses and said, I'm really sorry, I need to go to the bathroom right now. And the head of the group that was part of this training actually went with me. All right. And I said, no, you really don't need to accompany me to the bathroom. Please don't. But he insisted. He felt so concerned about my health that he felt compelled to accompany me and make sure that I was all right. And again, I thought, wow, the milk of human kindness. Yeah. I'm not sure I would have done the same in return, to be perfectly brutally honest. But it was just an example of genuine human care and kindness.
And it's something that I've experienced all around the world. I had a job where I was verifying software in Ghent in Belgium. I did the daft thing on the plane of putting my business work phone and personal phone in the pocket in front, and obviously forgot about them. Walked out up to the gate, and the gate doors shut behind me. And I had without the work phone, I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have anything about the address for the office the next day or anything. So I waited about 45 minutes for it to open, and I managed to get it. But it was an hour train journey. Got there about midnight. Realised that the hotel had booked the desk shuts at 10 p.m. and it was midnight. So I didn't bring a jacket with me for some reason. So it started raining, and I was wasn't the best part of where I was staying, the city. And I was walking around, and it got about 3 in the morning. I managed to flag down a taxi, who coincidentally charged me something like $30 to drive me 200 yards, but that's a different side of things. Had some food because I hadn't eaten, and then I got up a few hours later, and he asked me, have you seen anything of Ghent, the city? I said, oh, no, and I told him the story, and he said, well, just wait there 1 second. And he went and out the door, had a chat with his boss, and he said, this will only take 10 minutes. I'll take you for the tour of the city, we'll have some lunch, and I'll drop you off at the airport.
Fabulous.
No need to do that whatsoever. There's no obligation business-wise or anything. They just thought, oh, that sounded quite bad. We'll do something nice for you. And it's amazing. If you read the news every day, you wouldn't expect that kind of thing, really, would you?
Yeah. So I've got a couple of top tips for people travelling to a country they haven't been to before, or if you're going to do business in a country that you might have travelled to as a holidaymaker or a tourist. I mean, the first one's pretty obvious. Learn some of the basic lingual things, hello, goodbye, thank you, please, because it doesn't take much effort, and particularly with the phones that we all carry around nowadays, you can even have it take care of some of the work for you. But to be seen to have taken the effort to at least learn some of the basics of how to communicate. The second thing is I will particularly for less westernized countries, if you can even say that anymore, is take the effort ahead of time to learn about business culture.
Good.
So the obvious ones are Japan. The first time I went to Japan, I must have spent a day studying. I know there are certain rituals. There's a business card ritual. There's certain things you absolutely don't do when you're in company with business people. Take the effort to do that, because that could pay dividends, and it would certainly help you treading on a pothole in terms of making a fool of yourself, or worse still, upsetting someone that you're meeting, whether you intended to or not.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is try and learn a little bit about the history of where you're going, because in those initial casual conversations where you're breaking the ice and you're starting to develop rapport, again, it shows that you've taken the effort to at least learn something about where they live and work. And I've always found those things really valuable, and on the whole, people have recognised and acknowledged that I'd taken the effort to at least learn.
Yeah. Makes a big difference.
It does. It helps nurture the relationships.
Yeah. I remember one of Calibrate's German clients, I was determined to do a meeting in German, and I'd spent the last 9-10 months teaching myself, and it was ridiculous really, because their English was invariably better than mine, so I started off the meeting in German, and I could see the smiles around the room and probably getting it horrendously wrong, and they let me go for about 5 minutes, and they said, "James, this is really good, but should we just do it in English?" But I think, like you say, it's the intent that you've made the effort for them, and that brings you closer together with them. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah.
So, I suppose we should bring it to a close. We could probably go on for ages.
We could spend the whole day here. Yeah.
So, when it comes to Elevate Exec and yourself, how people would like to have a chat with you about potentially working with you, how would they find you?
The easiest thing is go to the website, so elevateexec.co.uk. There are phone numbers, email addresses, and a form. Yeah. So there's a very simple form that people can fill in, and that I will respond to immediately, obviously. Yeah. But I think that's or contact me through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
DM me through LinkedIn.
Fantastic. We'll put all those details on the description of the podcast, and thanks for coming in.
Oh, thank you. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Have a good weekend.
Yes. Nice. There's so many topics that could have gone.